I teach church history for a living, and even still, I come across things that I'm not quite sure what to make of it. Maybe you've had the same experience. So in this episode, I want to share with you 5 questions to ask about any historical source you come across that deals with our church's history. I'm Anthony Sweat, and this is Seekers Wanted. I had a friend once come up to me who knew I was a painter, and he said, "Will you do a painting of the first vision?" And I was like, "Sure." When I asked him what it was, he said, "I want a painting of God touching Joseph Smith's eyes." And I had never heard of that before. I asked him why he wanted me to paint that. And he said, well, there is this one source that says that God touched Joseph's eyes in the grove. I hesitated because I didn't know if I wanted to put into paint something that may not have really happened in our church's history. So then I decided I better look this up first. And there is this source. In 1893, there's this man named Charles Walker who records in his journal that he heard a man named John Alger tell a story about when John Alger was a young boy clear back in Kirtland, Ohio. He heard Joseph Smith tell the first vision. And in the first vision, he said God touched him in the eyes. Now, if you were me, would you do the painting? Is that a believable source? Did that really happen in our church's history? So the first question that we want to ask ourselves about any story we hear about church history is, where's this coming from? Is it a primary source, a secondary source, or a tertiary source? A primary source is somebody who is actually there. They participated or they witnessed the event. A secondary source is somebody who heard about the event from a primary source. A tertiary one, you can play the game of telephone. It gets passed on to a third-hand people. All 3 of them create sources. Which one's more believable? It's obvious the primary source is usually more reliable. Let me just stop here before I go on with the 5 questions. And one of the things you have to remember is there is no such thing as objective history. There just isn't. History is not a record of facts. History is created by people who interpret evidence about the past. It's always subjective. It's the difference between being at the event or hearing about the event from somebody else through their perspective. So take this first vision source. One of the reasons why it's a little questionable is because this is not Joseph Smith recording this. This is Joseph Smith telling John Alger, who now has told Charles Walker. It's a tertiary source. It's gone down the telephone line a little bit. And every time that happens, details get lost. People reinterpret things through their own lenses. And it's possible that error and bias gets introduced. The second question to ask yourself about any story about church history is it a contemporary account or a later reminiscence? What that means is, are they recording the event fairly soon from when it took place, or are they waiting decades later to tell about it or to write it down? So take me for example. I was a high school basketball player, but every year as time goes on, I become a better basketball player in my mind. You and I all know what happens to human memory over time. It shifts, it fades, even unconsciously, by the way. For this reason, we like to look at sources that are produced at or relatively near the time of the event. They're usually more reliable with those facts and details about the story. The third question to ask ourselves about any story we hear about church history is this: does it seek to have an objective perspective, or does it have a lot of reason to be loaded with bias? Now, I want to be clear. None of us are free from bias. We all carry biases. But sometimes we have more reason for bias than at other times. To understand bias, let's suppose there was a car accident. Driver 1 claims this happened. Driver 2 claims the complete opposite and this happened. However, there's innocent bystander 3 who says this is what happened. Whose report are you more likely to believe if you're the police officer? Driver 1, driver 2, or innocent bystander 3? It's obvious why you might not want to put all the money on driver 1 or 2. They have more stake in the game and more potential for bias. So the same might be true with any church history story. Everybody who creates a source has potential for some bias. What you and I want to look for is, do they have a lot of bias involved? Is there a lot at stake? The fourth question to ask about any historical story that you hear is, what's its relationship to other sources that deal with the same event? So let's go back to the story about the first vision. There are 9 known sources that were produced during Joseph Smith's lifetime about the first vision. Guess how many of those say that God touched Joseph in the eyes? 0. John Alger's later account is the only one that makes that claim. So anytime you're dealing with a church history story, The best practice is to say what is consistently claimed in the various sources, not what's mentioned in one source on its own. That'll help you know better what to trust. So the fifth question to ask is this: is there actual evidence to support the claim, or is it just conjecture, opinion, hearsay? For example, people make lots of claims about Joseph Smith's practice of plural marriage, lots of them. However, the question to ask yourself is this: are there actual historical documents and evidence to support the claim, or is it just the person's opinion? So the next time somebody comes up to you and says, "Did you know this about church history?" don't freak out. But also, don't just believe them either. The best thing to do is to ask yourself, what's the source behind what they're saying happened? And then to ask yourself these 5 questions about whether you should or shouldn't believe that historical source. That'll help you and me become better seekers of truth so that we know which church history we want to believe.